meeting. I already started
Mm-hmm.
and admitted some guests. Okay, we're gonna start maybe in
Ondan al, bulunsun o zaman. Okay. Hi, everyone. Hocam, Fatma hocam, you're on mute, I guess. We couldn't hear you.
okay. You make me unmute.
Oh, no, not me.
Okay, dear guests, dear colleagues, dear students, dear educators, welcome to our Global Thursday Talks. We are going very well, actually. We are having very important, very leading names here, and we discuss, we just share ideas. Today, we are hosting another leading name in political education, in adult education, and in critical pedagogy. He is from Germany. Arnd-Michael Nohl is now our guest speaker, and we are going to listen to him about maybe half an hour, and he wants to share another half an hour for the questions. We have already had so many questions from you, and you can still write your questions on the chat box. And I'm going to give the floor to Eda, but I want to say something about Arnd. Arnd has a close connection with Turkey. He studied at Hacettepe University and maybe partly at Ankara University, and he's still in close connection with our adult education scholars and critical pedagogy scholars, and he's here now. I'm very honored to host him today. Okay, Eda, it's yours.
Thank you very much, Fatma hocam. It's a pleasure meeting again for the 5th time. And I would like to go on and briefly introduce our host and our distinguished speaker. Also, I'll briefly go over some overall webinar rules. Dear participants, Dr. Fatma Mızıkacı specialized in curriculum and instruction, and she is currently an associate professor at Ankara University. And she has been recently hosting Global Thursday Talks on education. Arnd-Michael Nohl, I would like to go on with Professor Nohl. Professor Nohl studied education science, psychology, and Islamic science at Heidelberg University, at Hacettepe University in Ankara, and at the Free University of Berlin. And also, he studied at Ankara University and took classes from Cevat Geray as well. From 1997 to 2001, he was research and teaching assistant in the working group Qualitative Research on Human Development at Free University of Berlin. At 2000, Professor Nohl received his PhD at the Free University, and his thesis has been published as Migration and the Experience of Difference, Young Locals and Migrants in a Qualitative Comparison of Milieux. From 2001 to 2004, He had his postdoc study at the Institute of Education Science of the Otto von Guericke University. From 2004 to 2006, he was assistant professor for intercultural education at Free University, Berlin. And since 2006, Professor Nohl is at Education Science at the Helmut Schmidt University in Hamburg. As we closely follow in Turkish as well, Professor Nohl's areas of interest include research on education, migration and youth, philosophy of education, methodology and the practice of qualitative research in education, and social affairs, entrepreneurship, cultural plurality and the school, consulting and evaluation in non-formal and formal education. His books have been translated and gone into many editions. And thank you everyone for showing up. It's again a pleasure to see you from different institutions, and we have this Global Thursday Talk community as well right now. Before we start with Professor Nohl's talk, here are some overall reminders. So make sure that you are mute so that we have a good quality of sound. And please, please, please use the chat box to type your questions and comments. We make sure that we save them for later on for our archive as well. So they're all very valuable. And there will be a question and answer part after Professor Nohl's talk. So make sure you write your questions on the chat box. And our webinar will have two parts. Michael Nohl will talk about political education and its implications regarding the current situation for around 30 minutes. And after Professor's talk, we will finish the meeting and answer the questions. And with that, it's a pleasure for me to present you Professor Arnd-Michael Nohl.
Just a reminding, sorry Arnd, you can ask your questions in Turkish. You can write and type them in Turkish because Arnd speaks Turkish too. Okay.
Okay, so should I start?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you. Good evening, hepinize iyi akşamlar. Thank you very much for inviting me to this distinguished talk. I hope it allows us to share our thoughts on educational problems and to widen our academic horizons. I will do my best to engage in a discussion with you and will be happy to answer your questions, criticisms, and comments. Although I wish to see you all in co-presence, I'm still grateful that today's technologies allow us to meet online. I hope you are all well and in robust health. For today's talk, Fatma, Mızıkacı, Kemal Inal, and I have chosen the title Political Education Between Erziehung and Bildung, as I believe the difference between Erziehung and Bildung may help us to understand two different concepts that underlie education in general and political education in particular. It is for this reason, and not for marketing German concepts, that we have put these two German words into the title. My talk has three parts. I will first introduce you to the historical background of political education in Germany. Then I shall discuss the significance of political mass education during the Corona crisis in Germany. Finally, I want to conclude with some criticism on the notion of political Bildung. And after my talk, we have plenty of time to discuss both this issue as well as any other questions that you wish to raise. So please feel free to post your questions on my talk and on my work in general in the chat room. Political education has played an important role in the history of 20th century Germany. As you may know, the Third Reich saw an indoctrinating political education by the NSDAP, its youth organizations, as well as by public schools. After Germany's defeat and the occupation, the Allied forces, both in the east and the west of Germany, tried to re-educate the German people to turn it into a non-fascist society. Since the 1950s, the local authorities took back control over political education. This, however, did not imply that education in general and political education in particular were structured homogeneously. As you may know, in Germany, it is not the central federal government that is responsible for education, but the Länder, the federal states. Actually, the division into federal states was a measure of the Allied forces. They provided for the police, education, and the health system to be placed under the control of the Länder. Despite a coordinating body among the Länder, each state has been autonomous in regulating its education policies. Another point of contention that emerged after the 1968 cultural and political uprising was the fight between conservative and leftist activists and scholars of political education. It was in this atmosphere of fierce discussions between leftists and conservatives, as well as between the different federal states, the Länder, run by leftist or conservative governments, that in 1976, core activists and scholars of political education came together in a suburb of a southwestern German town that is called Beutelsbach. And please, now you could share with us the slide. Yes, Kim.
Just give me a second.
Yeah, the participants, I suppose, again had their heated discussions. But after the meeting, an assistant of the meeting's organizer, who was in charge of writing the minutes of the meeting, wrote down some memorable sentences. Admitting that his ideas were subjective and that the meeting had not served to find a consensus on political education, Hans-Georg Wehling outlined the most important points of a possible consensus beyond the discrepant political, scientific, and pedagogical positions of the participants. You here see the small, the suburb of this small town where a very famous consensus has been reached. This assistant wrote, seemingly uncontradicted are three basic principles of political education. And these are really important, so I put them on this slide. First, prohibition against overwhelming the pupil. It is not permissible to catch pupils unprepared or unaware, by whatever means, for the sake of imparting desirable opinions and to hinder them from forming an independent judgment. It is precisely at this point that the dividing line runs between political education and indoctrination. Indoctrination is incompatible with the role of a teacher in a democratic society, and the universally accepted objective of making pupils capable of independent judgment, which is called in German Mündigkeit. Second, treating controversial subjects as controversial. Matters which are controversial in intellectual and political affairs must also be taught as controversial in educational instruction. This demand is very closely linked with the first point above. For if differing points of view are lost sight of, options suppressed, and alternatives remain undiscussed, then the path to indoctrination is being trodden. We have to ask whether teachers have in fact a corrective role to play, that is, whether they should or should not specially set out such points of view and alternatives which are foreign to the social and political origins of pupils and other participants in programs of political education. In affirming this second basic principle, it becomes clear why the personal standpoint of teachers, the intellectual and theoretical views they represent, and their political opinions are relatively uninteresting. To repeat an example that has already been given, their understanding of democracy presents no problems, for opinions contrary to theirs are also being taken into account. That is a very important principle. And the third one is giving way to the personal interests of pupils. Pupils must be put in a position to analyze a political situation and to assess how their own personal interests are affected, as well as to seek means and ways to influence the political situation they have identified according to their personal interests. Such an objective brings a strong emphasis on the acquisition of the necessary operational skills, which is in turn a logical consequence of the first two principles set out above. Okay, so now you can again put down the slides. Thank you. Although these three basic principles were not agreed upon in the said meeting, after they have been published, everybody has agreed with them. The three basic principles of the so-called Beutelsbach consensus became a milestone in the German history of political education. And it's still valid, and you can even find it in newspapers. It is referred to in newspapers in the past months. The three basic principles were almost synonymous with the concept of politische Bildung. One reason for this may have been that the concept of Bildung, as a German concept, in general owns some similarities with the basic principles. Bildung, in its modern version, implies that the person who undergoes this process of Bildung develops his or her own orientations, her own ideas of what is right and wrong, and how to conduct a decent life. So if you are interested in a discussion of Bildung in relation to Turkey, and if you speak Turkish actually, you might be interested in a paper that I wrote for the Birikim dergisi in 2012. So there you can find out some more on the concept of Bildung in general. The three basic principles and the respective concept of political Bildung have become so popular in West and later in East Germany that scholars and politicians tend to think that our democracy is only built on political Bildung. Political education, in the sense of political Erziehung, a concept that is very similar to the original meaning of the Turkish concept of eğitim, turned into a concept that is only used for describing political education in dictatorships and totalitarian regimes, such as the Nazi era or the German Democratic Republic, in which, I quote, an existing socio-political state is legitimized by political education in the interest of the power groups benefiting from it. In such political education, again quote, youth is seen as an object. Political education or political Erziehung, as I would define it, here refers to the sustainable imposition of political orientations on those who are to be educated, in contrast to politische Bildung. The idea that our democracy is only built on political Bildung and not on political education in the sense of Erziehung is anything but correct. Even though the three basic principles structure a large part of political Bildung in the Federal Republic of Germany, there are always phenomena, and there have been always phenomena that can be described as political Erziehung. One of them is the mass education during the Corona crisis. And now I come to the second part of my talk, and if you wish, you can read it also in Turkish, even while listening to me. It has been published in the Yetişkin Eğitimi dergisi in the newest edition. In many countries severely affected by the corona pandemic, the authorities have imposed curfews. In northern Italy, no one was allowed to leave their homes without a valid reason. In Spain, a curfew was imposed in March until May. In Turkey, as you all know, or most of you know, all citizens from under 20 or over 65 years of age were forbidden to enter the streets until further notice for a long time. And complete curfews were imposed again and again for the most populous provinces, which for economic reasons were limited to long weekends. All these measures could easily be controlled by the police. If anyone wanted or had to leave the house at all, this person needed a written permission from the authorities, as for example in northern Italy. In Germany, however, when the state governments responsible for disease control in its federal system, under the coordination of the federal chancellor, decided against a curfew and in favor of a ban on contact, they set the course for a concerted version of mass education. A curfew, as in the other nation states, could have been enforced to a large extent by the police, regardless of whether the people concerned are reasonable or not. The ban on physical proximity, however, could hardly be enforced by punishment and threats alone. Rather, the Länder governments were dependent on the people themselves being willing to keep their distance from each other. The political decisions, appeals, and measures in the following weeks showed that Chancellor Merkel and the state's prime ministers did not, however, leave this to chance or to spontaneous insight of individuals. They relied on the political education of the population. Because, and this is the credo of every educator, willingness to act that does not come about of its own accord must be actively brought about. Even though leaders may not understand their actions as education themselves, their actions undoubtedly have educational features. By education, in the sense of Erziehung, I refer to the sustained imposition of orientations, or to say it in Turkish, eğitimde bir kişi başka bir kişiye belli bir yönelimi kabul ettirmeye çalışıyor. Orientations are imposed firstly in the sense that education is effective where people do not develop new orientations of their own accord, for example through learning or socialization processes, but must be guided to do so. Secondly, orientations are imposed in the sense that the new orientation is initially experienced by the persons to be educated as contrary to their own current interests and sensitivities. And thirdly, it is an award of courage. An award of courage because the educator performs education out of the conviction that the person to be educated is in principle capable of adopting the orientation expected of him or her. The concept of orientation here refers less to a conscious opinion or conviction than to a way of acting and living that is to become a habit. The contrasting concept to education is, as I mentioned before, that of Bildung. Education is an imposition, Bildung is an offer, right? Lenzen and Luhmann, and they get right to the point. In processes of Bildung, people find their own orientations or change them. They are sometimes stimulated to do so by the situation or by teachers, but never pushed. Not so in mass education, where the members of a society are pushed and pedagogically treated, as Prange and Strobel-Eisele, who coined the term mass education, say. At the center of the German Corona education campaign, as I would like to call it here, is certainly the speech by the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, on 18th March. And this I have to explain to you, as you have speeches of your president almost every day. In Germany, speeches by the Chancellor are televised maybe twice a year, not more, or even only once for Christmas Eve. But otherwise, the Chancellor doesn't speak directly by television to the people. So it was a very important speech. Its sole purpose was not only to oblige the country's inhabitants to keep physical distance, but to convince them that it is their task, capitalized in Merkel's speech manuscript, and in the inhabitants' own power to curb the speed at which the virus spreads. In this way, the citizens were not only expected to trust the expertise of virology and to massively restrict social life, they were also expected to have the courage to cope with the crisis themselves, because, as Merkel literally said, everyone counts. Just 1 second, I have to put the window. Close the window, my daughter is making quite a lot of noise outside. Literally, her speech says, and I quote, "Let me talk now about what I believe is most urgent today. All measures taken by the state would come to nothing if we were to fail to use the most effective means for preventing this virus from spreading too rapidly. And that is we ourselves. As indiscriminately as each one of us can be affected by the virus, each and every one of us must help. First and foremost, by taking seriously what matters today, not panicking, but also not thinking for a single moment that he or she doesn't matter after all. No one is expendable. Everyone counts, and we need a collective effort," quote, unquote. By appealing to insight, the Chancellor's attempt at education is based on a specific conception of the human person, who is sovereign, that is, in principle, free to act, thinks rationally, and is able to see the facts and can act in solidarity. Actually, a video speech given 2 days earlier by Federal President Steinmeier reads very similarly, although it received less attention. Both Steinmeier and Merkel completely refrained, and this is unusual for education, from threats of sanction. But such threats were probably no longer necessary. The media had already made it clear to everyone how strict curfews, for example in China, can be applied, and how terrible it is when the epidemic, as in Italy, where the military transported the dead in trucks, is not stopped in time. Against the background of these deterrent scenarios, the ban on contact and the educational demands associated with it inevitably seemed to be the most bearable alternative. Most of the time, educators try to convince individuals that it is in their own best interest to obey, to be attentive at school, not to fight, or to eat less sweets. In the corona crisis, this only works to a limited extent. A large part of the population, being young and healthy, hardly needs to fear the virus. These people are not supposed to act for their own benefit, but, according to Merkel, to act in a spirit of solidarity. Quote. It is precisely this, again, quote, action in the spirit of solidarity and not how to best protect oneself, that the educational efforts implied in this and other political speeches were aimed at. In the first step, Merkel still relied on insight and has probably convinced many people. But as is always the case with education, not everyone is willing. In a second step, therefore, the prime ministers of the federal states threatened with punishments. Such punishments, and even the announcement, have an educational effect, as Pranger and Strobel-Eisele emphasize. I do not know which intentions led the press to report constantly in the following days about police controls and imposed fines. But for sure, they thus strengthened the threats of sanctions and helped in such a way that everyone took seriously and adopted the orientation the Chancellor expected them to take over. The extent to which the media became a resonating space for mass education can be illustrated by 2 press articles. The Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung of 27th April reports in detail about the funeral of an old woman. Funerals in Corona times are difficult anyway, as only a few mourners are allowed to attend. However, the deceased was the mother of a man who was considered the patriarch of an extended family notorious as an Arabic clan in Berlin. The fact that its members not only gathered by the hundreds immediately after the old lady's death and also at her funeral, but also did not observe the rules of distance, was mentioned by the newspaper in the same breath as the criminal offenses of which these people were accused in general. In this way, the disregard for the ban on contact has directly been placed in the context of gang crime. Without wanting to accuse the newspaper of deliberate action, the appeal to insight is here underpinned by drastic descriptions of the misconduct, as Pranger and Strobel-Eisele put it. The imposition of preventive orientations can also be more directly contoured against the background of fictitious countermodels. In the Tagesspiegel of April 7, a guest article appeared whose author argued that everyone should wear a mask and download a Corona app to his or her smartphone. I don't know if you know these Corona apps. They are their purpose is to follow those who are infected. Actually, I'm not a person who would be able to download any app because I have a very outdated telephone. This guy, this guest author, did not leave it at that, however, but demanded that the leisure and professional activities of all those who do not wish to submit to this commandment be further restricted, as they represented a special danger, I quote, special danger. The newspaper subsequently titled, I quote again, "Lockdown, yes, but only for dangerous persons." So people like me would be dangerous because I wouldn't be able to download such an app. And in this way, the newspaper moved all mask and app-averse fellow citizens into the proximity of Islamist terrorists, for whom the word dangerous person, Gefährder, has been reserved until now. However, the success of mass education is not only dependent on threats of sanctions and their metaphorical exaggeration. It is also important that the educators themselves do not contradict themselves. We know this from mom and dad, who sometimes let themselves be played off against each other when they revealed their own disagreement to the children. At the beginning of the Corona crisis, there was a small competition among the prime ministers to see who could introduce the strictest bans the quickest. When the ban on contact then took effect, but increasingly caused problems for people and the economy, some heads of state tried to outdo each other in relaxation proposals. Then Angela Merkel warned against relaxation discussion orgies. When she did this, this may have had something to do with a Tina attitude of which she is sometimes accused. I don't know if you know the Tina attitude. It is something referred to Margaret Thatcher and means there is no alternative. These are politicians who say something in a way that they don't leave any alternative opinion. But beyond this political dimension, however, this warning can be understood as an appeal to the unity of the educators. For as soon as the pupils, in this case, the entire population, sense that the educators are not or no longer sure of their own cause, they not only look for further gaps, they also lose confidence in the educators and the orientation they are expected to follow. Educational staff and parents know that they must not get caught in the self-woven web of imposed demands and punishment threats. Politicians must not overstep the mark either, especially towards adults. The mature citizens should not overdo it with the imposition of orientations. The history of the younger Federal Republic is full of cases in which this has led to the flourishing of opposition critical of the political system. One then has two possibilities. Either one tries to make the adoption of the expected orientations more attractive, or one ends the mass education. Increasing the attractiveness of the expected orientations, for example, is the declared goal of a communication campaign by the Berlin Senate, which is Berlin is a federal state in itself. Slogans such as "we stick our distance together" or "the good news, solidarity is contagious too" are intended to use irony and puns to help people no longer see the rule of distance and the wearing of masks as imposition, but as part of a good, relaxed style. It is also helpful to respond to the concerns of people who are willing but still don't feel happy with the imposed orientations. The fact that Federal President Steinmeier and his wife, Elke Büdenbender, in their video message of 8 April, addressed the concerns of those who are suffering bitterly from the crisis measures was probably aimed in this direction. But at some point, the political leadership must not only address the concerns of the people, but also their objections, if it does not want to become authoritarian. Then the objections expressed against the usefulness of the measures, but also against the restriction of civil rights, must be discussed. That is the end of mass education, but it can become the starting cycle for political Bildung. Because political Bildung and democracy in general thrives on the controversy of opinions, including on how to deal with the Corona crisis. Not only to have different political views, but to discuss these differences of opinion controversially and publicly create opportunities for all people to develop their own attitude to the question of how we want to live together with and after Corona. The core task of political Bildung is to encourage the independent development and change of political orientations on the basis of the controversial exchange about different political options. As much as the political education of adults in crisis situations may seem necessary, it must be clearly limited to that moment. In democratic societies, political education in the sense of Erziehung is sometimes a necessary and exceptional evil. But political Bildung is and should be the normality in democracies. However, we should not think that political Bildung is not problematic in itself. Although the Beutelsbach consensus, which I told you about, continues to be widely accepted, there are some scholars, let's call them critical educationalists, who have pointed to important pitfalls and weaknesses of the concept of political Bildung itself. Firstly, topics that society displaces, that is, topics that society, for whatever reason, does not discuss, are not taken into account. For example, in Germany, for many years during the 1970s and 80s, the rights of homosexual people have not been discussed in society, and neither in courses of political Bildung. Only when this issue has become prominent in political debates, it has also been made a topic of political Bildung. Secondly, certain positions critical of society are excluded. It is usually only those positions that are represented in the parliament that are represented in political Bildung as well. But all those positions that are critical of the representative democracy itself are not represented as equally meaningful positions. For example, in courses of political Bildung, communism or political Islam may be covered, but they are usually not represented as positions worthy of consideration and respect. For this reason, all those political convictions that lie within the limits of multi-perspectivity and courses of political Bildung appear normal, but those that go beyond these limits appear extremist. Thirdly, the basic principles of political Bildung are not applied to themselves. Rather, the pluralistic model of society belongs to the taboo zone, which remains excluded from the space that is open to contradiction and conflict. That means that teachers may put up for discussion almost anything during courses of political Bildung, but they will never question pluralism and multi-perspectivity themselves. For us, this may sound self-evident. However, if you are a person who is attached to a totalitarian ideology, be it political or religious, or who believes in conspiracy theories, you may experience the multi-perspectivity and pluralism that is the basis of political Bildung as a threat to and as a questioning of your own convictions. And at that point, political Bildung turns into political education. As we come to understand, political Bildung itself has its limits. In courses of political Bildung, you may indeed be enabled to develop our own political positions on this or that specific issue by engaging in controversial discussions during which the teacher does not try to overwhelm you. The courses of political Bildung have a socializing effect of their own. I need to explain this. As far as people grow into the limits of political Bildung, marked by these 3 points of criticism as a matter of course, and do not notice these limits or perceive them as completely normal, they adopt the pluralistic orientations linked to them. Political Bildung thus has a socializing effect in the performativity of its practice, precisely when it adheres to the basic principles of the Beutelsbach consensus. You are socialized into a pluralistic democratic society in a way. By educating politically with regard to a specific topic, for example, nuclear energy and the controversial views that exist on it, the students are socialized into the pluralistic model of society. Because one can speak of political socialization when and to the extent that one is introduced to basic political principles and orientations about practical life without explicitly dealing with them. Moreover, Political Bildung, as regards the performativity of its courses, may even have an educative effect in the sense of political Erziehung. Because those students who do not perceive the controversy and pluralism of the political discussions as normal will regard the discussion itself as an imposition of a pluralistic orientation. For example, students who are attached to a totalitarian ideology, that is, to ideologies that do not account for any other meaningful political position, will be offended by the performativity of political Bildung. For them, to freely discuss political issues controversially is an imposition of orientations. They feel pressed into pluralism, and in this sense, they are politically educated. In the German academic discourse, one then tends to speak of value education. That is, of Werteerziehung ya da değerler eğitimi in Turkish. As I hope to have made clear, political education is a controversial issue. The German concepts of Erziehung and Bildung may help us to better grasp the range of meanings that are attached to political education. My remarks on the criticism of the Beutelsbach consensus also show that there is nothing like a pure political Bildung. Even where political education is structured by pluralism and where students are not overwhelmed by the teacher, political Bildung can bear the features of political Erziehung. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Nohl, for your speech. Now we have some questions. If you are ready, we can go on with our questions.
Sure.
You're finished, I think.
Can I interrupt Ezgi very shortly? Just to summarize what you have pointed out here is very important, actually, Arnd. Thank you for this. As a scholar in the area of curriculum and instruction, my observation is in Turkey, in Turkish literature, Bildung is one of the concepts or one of the models or approach that unfortunately takes less attention by the curriculum and instruction scholars. And this is not both in theory and practice, this is not a popular or a valuable subject that we pay attention. Now, I'm talking about for myself, of course, but this is also my observation, even I can generalize this to the continent Europe, The curriculum and instruction subjects there, what is discussed there in the continent Europe, unfortunately takes less attention in our field, and I'm having some of my PhD students here, and this is a message to them. Plus, we are maybe we are too focused on Anglo-Saxon, literature in curriculum and instruction. This may be one of the reasons that why this subject takes less attention. Bildung is very closely related to curriculum and instruction. Even what you have, talked here, critical Bildung and, transformative learning, so close to the area of curriculum and instruction. Mm-hmm. So this is very important what you have pointed out here.
Actually, in Germany, I think the problem is somehow similar. In the past 10 years or so, Bildung as a concept has lost importance and significance in the curriculum studies, especially because after the PISA shock, the PISA shock, I guess you should have had one yourself.
Yes.
We had one in 2001, and since then, actually the curriculum and the whole teaching in schools is structured according to good PISA results, which means it is very much focused on delivering skills and knowledge which can be tested. And Bildung is something which is very difficult, or more or less it is not possible to test it. So that makes a big difference, and for the concept of Bildung, that has been a bad backdrop. I think in the past few years, maybe the PISA hype has slowed down a little bit. So maybe now, again, people who advocate Bildung can make more progress. I hope so, at least.
Okay, this is important to know. Yeah, maybe we can exchange ideas in future too, you know, just to compare programs maybe. And PISA shock, we are having PISA shock too every year in every exam, in every test. Okay, now questions maybe, Ezgi?
Okay, first one. Do you think the content of online education is transforming into an international one from national focus? Do you think, especially in some nationalist countries, nationalist ideology, indoctrination through curriculum is discarded by internationalization of distance education? I think these are two questions combined into one.
Okay. Not really my area of expertise, but still I have some ideas about it. I think distance education could, of course, serve to make education, turn education into a more international issue and to have a more international curriculum, for example. But at least as far as I understand what happened during the Corona crisis, more or less the opposite has taken place, at least here in Germany. Usually online education does not mean distance education, but it means that the teacher gives online education to the pupils in the same suburb, and there's nothing really international about it. Only the data is going internationally, but the contents are quite national again. And even more so during the Corona crisis, what usually has been very important for Germany and other EU countries was the commuting between countries, the traveling between countries, and this has totally stopped. And I think that is really a bad effect on education and on the internationalization of education. You know, all these Erasmus students who now cannot continue their studies. In the past years, there have been less in Turkey, as far as I know, but in Europe, it's still a very, very important thing to become an Erasmus student. And all these programs now have their problems with the shutdown of the universities and with online education. And you know also that you may have heard that Mr. Trump has tried to kick all students of the big universities out of the country because they now can follow their studies online. Actually has thrown it back, this proposal, but you see that that distance education does not really mean internationalization.
Okay. Second question, what does online education mean to the migrants? Is online education a realistic tool for the migrants?
First of all, I would say to speak of migrants is just too broad a term. So what I think is important is there are migrants, let's say, for example, the refugees who came to Germany in the past years. For them, online education is just a real big problem, especially for the kids, because for them it means that they are not able to learn German in the classroom. And it's very difficult for them to take part in online education because all those people who are not from the middle class in Germany usually don't have good computers to get connected to online education. So there's a big problem. But on the other hand, for example, from Turkey, we have quite a lot of friends who are not only well educated, but highly qualified people who came here to Germany again since about 2016 or 17. And for them, online education and distance education, of course, it is very normal and very helpful item with which they can, actually they organize their life online. Because for them it is so easy to work in Germany and still to live with their mind together with their relatives in Turkey, for example, or to make contracts in German, although they don't speak German, because Google translates for them. So for them, the use of the internet devices is very different from those people who have difficulties in connecting to the internet at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Third question. Do you have something to add, or can I?
No, that's fine. If you have anything to add, or if something is unclear, please tell me.
Okay. Third question. This is about building, I guess. As building is defined as the radical questioning of previous and the creation of new figures of world and self-relation, does it have possibilities to reconsider in the era of digitalization as against Google learning, with brackets, replaced with cumulative knowledge?
I hope I understand the question correctly, but in a world in which Google, the internet, globalization are very important points of our normal daily life, Bildung may mean to get rid of that and to question what has been quite a habit for us to go on the internet, to check the emails and those things, and to just say, well, at least for a while, I disconnect. And I try to find out what life is about if I'm not in the digital world, but in the analogous world somewhere. Yeah? And only speak to people who I really see in presence. So this may really provide us with new relations to ourselves and to the world, to stay away from all these technological innovations that we have experienced in the past years. But of course, on the other hand, I've done some research on people who discovered the internet in the year 2000 or so. These were very old, not very old women at the age of about 65, and for them, until that time, the computer and the internet had no significance, had not have any significance at all. But when they were retired and when their children left, they discovered computers and the internet, and for them to get connected was a big Bildung experience. So what is Bildung? You can never say what Bildung is in terms of to get on the internet is Bildung, or to get out of the internet, or to be globalized, or to be unglobalized. But Bildung is, I think, the experience of this change in your life. This change in your life, because if you experience that something, and especially your self and work relations, change fundamentally, then that implies that you see that life could be led in a different way as well. You get your connection, your habits are then less. How could I express this? Your attachment to the world is not so much. I try to speak it in Turkish, okay?
Yeah, of course.
Dünya bağlılığınız azalabiliyor. Şu anki alışkanlıklarınıza bağlılığınız, eğer bu şekilde bir Bildung sürecini yaşıyorsanız ve sizin kendinizle ve dünyanızla ilişkileriniz bu kadar çok değişebilirse, bir anda, o zaman genel olarak daha çok esnek olabiliyorsunuz ve bence bildung süreci bununla ilgilidir. So sorry for speaking Turkish, but that actually I live in a Turkish-German family, so we are bilingual, and I only read and write English, but I don't speak a lot of English, so that is the reason why my English is so poor.
Arnd, I think, sorry Ezgi to interrupt, but I think there is no problem in your speaking Turkish here at the moment, because we are having only Guy Sinise who speaks English, but he is learning Turkish.
Ah, okay.
So he wants, sorry Guy, I'm talking about you, but I know you want to hear more Turkish and you want to practice. So.
So he wants to hear Turkish with a heavy German accent.
Guy.
Please move on in Turkish, please. I'll talk to these guys later and learn more. Go ahead.
Okay, we see. Just see the questions and then we see how I can answer the best way, okay?
Okay, as you wish, in English or in Turkish, both way are possible. So let's move on. Fourth question. Do you foresee a no school education in the future?
Okay, that is a very interesting question, and I think Mclaren has talked about this as well, as he talked about the dangers of homeschooling. You remember that last week? And I think that is a point for critical pedagogues, and actually I'm not considering myself as a critical educationalist. I think that is a point which is very difficult. On the one hand, as far as I understand, in critical education, one is very critical of the state curriculum, of course. So the state school, in a way, of course, is something like an ideological or a part of the ideological apparatus of the state. On the other hand, homeschooling, as Mclaren told us, usually serves those people who like to raise their children in a very conservative, or as happens in the United States, in a religious way, in the evangelist way of life. So I think my position is a little bit different. I do think that the school is really important for everybody. The state school especially, not the private schools. I don't prefer private schools. But why is it important for everybody? The state school is providing a public space where children, for the first time in their life, if they don't go to the kindergarten, for the first time in their life, experience interaction with people from other walks of life, from other, what I would call milieus. And the important function of the school is to bring together people from different milieus, and in this way to help everybody to broaden his or her own horizon. And if you have education outside of school only, that means, of course, you receive the knowledge and skills the curriculum foresees, but you have no interaction with people with whom you have no acquaintance, people who would be strange to you. But the school, especially the primary school, provides such interaction. And for this reason, I would always advocate public schools, even if their curriculum would be ideologist, nationalist, or whatever. Of course, it shouldn't be, but still, I would say the public school is a very important device for people to broaden their own milieu-specific horizons. I have written something about this in Toplum Eğitim, Toplum Bilim dergisi, and you can read it, but the text is very, I think it's very difficult to translate this into Turkish, the ideas that I have put forward there.
Okay. I think Eda will go on from now on, but is it okay for Eda?
Sure, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, you know, it is the perfect time for my question, and this question was from Guy Senese, and we were lucky to enjoy his class on public education, intellectual foundations of public education at Ankara University. Here's the question. Will there be differences in school opening problems due to COVID? And will poor, worker and refugee school children have full government support?
They should have. This is being discussed in Germany quite a lot. During the close down of schools, of course, those who really suffered from it were people from the working class with what we call migration background, which is actually not really accurate. People whose family German is not spoken, and of course poor children. They really were disadvantaged because for them it was so difficult to get connected to the school. For them, the interaction in the classroom with other students is very important, for example, for learning the language. Who is also very much disadvantaged are all students of the first and second class, because for them it is so difficult to follow the curriculum on the computer. The state, let's say, here in Germany, some states try to provide special schooling for disadvantaged children during the summer months. I don't know how it works. In Berlin, nothing works very well anyway. So I'm not very hopeful on this. And I guess when the school starts again in August, or usually in August, it differs from state to state in Germany. They will have to do a big job on again trying to get all pupils on the same niveau, because some of them, of course, at home they have where the mummies could help them. They have no problems, had no problems during the Corona crisis, and others lack about 3 months of school education. And for teachers, this will be a very big task to get all of them on the same level. I hope this is something like an answer to your question. Of course, there will be technical problems for opening schools, and there's a lot of discussion on how they can continue schooling without having new hotspots of the pandemic. That is still discussed, and it's not clear how school will start in about 4 or 5 weeks here in Germany. Well, there are plans, but nobody really knows if the plans are going to work.
Yeah.
But they hope to have the classes again working fully.
Yeah, it's almost same in here. And speaking of teachers, I would like to ask another question. And this time the focus is on teacher. Do far-right parties have influence on students and teachers?
You mean in Germany, I guess?
Yes.
Well, far-right parties have an influence on students anyway, especially through direct contact over the internet, through family education. Within the families, there are fascist families who organize in Germany, in Eastern Germany, and try to educate their offspring in their way. They would like to have homeschooling, actually. Teachers are usually not right-wing people. But of course, one important leader of the right-wing extremist party Alternative for Germany in one of the states, he has been a history teacher. So in a way, this falsifies what I've just been saying. But usually teachers are more on the center left position, on the center left. And I don't think that the biggest influence on students will be by the teachers. It is more by the media, and it's more by our children, our students, and it's so easy to have a racist discourse, which easily can also become hegemonic in a school, because young people try to have their own hegemonies in school. It can be very easy to have an Islamist hegemonic discourse in a school. Of course, not everywhere in Germany, but in specific schools. But in the East, I'm very sure that there is also hegemonic fascist discourse in schools, which of course constitutes a big problem and challenge also for the teachers. Yeah, it's not so easy to react if students shout each other like you are a Jewish pig. That is a very common word recently used by younger students here in Germany. Of course, it's not always used in an ideological way and in a racist way. It's sometimes just used to injure the other person. And for a teacher, it's very difficult to interfere in these interactions. But not to interfere, but to interfere in an educative way. Let's put it like this.
Thank you very much. Now maybe I can move on to Turkish with this one. It's about Turkish curriculum. If that's okay. Mülteciler pandemi sürecinde sizce nasıl etkilendiler? Özellikle de eğitimde, Türk eğitim sisteminde, müfredatta Darwin'in teorisinin çıkarılması gibi çeşitli düzenlemeler var. Bunu nasıl değerlendirirsiniz, bu gelişmeleri?
Bu galiba yine iki soru. İlk soruya cevap vermeye çalışayım. Ondan sonra ikincisini. Mülteciler bence iki açıdan, yani ben bu konu üzerine çok fazla kafa yormadım ama iki açıdan çok etkilendiler. Bir kere Almanya'dan aslında ve sanırım Türkiye'de mülteciler böyle geniş evlerde oturmuyorlar benim gibi. Sıkışık bir şekilde oturuyorlar ve bu yüzden elbette onların koronadan korunması çok daha zor olmuştu. Karantina günlerinde ya da sokağa çıkma yasağı günlerinde öyle küçük evlerde yaşamak da korkunç olsa gerek. Bu bir. İkincisi iş piyasası ki böyle kalifiyesiz iş gücüne sonuçta giriyorlar. O iş piyasası Almanya'da epey azaldı. Onlar için bu bir sorun oluşturuyor. Ondan eminim. Ama bence en önemli sorun yani mülteci çocukları Almancayı nerede öğreniyorlar? Elbette bir öğretmenden öğrenmiyorlar. Daha çok diğer çocuklardan öğreniyorlar ve çocuklar arasındaki etkileşim Almanya'da sıfırlandı neredeyse. Yani benim de çocuğum var. Haftalarca evde tek başınaydı ve diğer çocuklarla iletişimi aslında internet üzerindeydi. Başka bir şey yoktu ve bu bence mülteci çocuklarını özellikle çok kötü bir şekilde etkiledi. Hem Almancayı öğrenmek konusunda ama bunun dışında da buradaki yaşam tarzlarını da öğrenmek açısından bu kesinlikle iyi olmadı ve umarım önümüzdeki haftalarda okul açılınca bu öğrenciler tekrar bu fırsatları yakalayabilirler ve biraz da arada açılan boşlukları kapatabilirler. Şimdi ikinci soruya geliyorum ki Darwin teorisiyle ilgili. Bu konuda Yani müfredatta ne öğretilir, ne öğretilmez, ne öğretilmeli, ne öğretilmemeli konusunda Almanya'da da bayağı tartışmalar yaşanıyor ara sıra. Şu konularda Darwin teorisi ve tabii ki İncil'de yazılan yaratılış hikaye demeyelim, çünkü bunu küçümsemek istemiyorum. Ama fikirler diyelim. Bazı Protestan kilisesine üye olmayıp da çok hani aşırı dinci veliler kesinlikle çocuklarının Darwin teorisini okumalarını istemiyorlar. Ama onların en büyük değeri aslında Almanya'da 3. sınıfta cinsellik dersi veriliyor. Bunu da kesinlikle istemiyorlar. Ve bunu ve kendi çocuklarını bundan muaf tutulmalarını mutlaka istiyorlar ve bu konuda bayağı tartışma yaratıyorlar. Anladığım kadarıyla Türkiye'de bu tabii ki böyle küçük bir azınlığın sorunu değil, daha çok hükümetin sorunu olmaktadır. Darwin teorisini anladığım kadarıyla Darwin teorisi hala var müfredatta ama adı yok. Öyle anladım. Müfredattan çıkarmak gibi bir mesele. Elbette bu iyi bir şey değildi. Bana kalırsa bu konuda demin bahsettiğim multiperspektivity üzerinden de çözülebilir. Bir çocuk okulda sadece Darwin teorisini öğrenmek zorunda değil. Çocuklar aynı zamanda biz nasıl dünyaya geldik, yani insan nasıl oluştu, bu dünya nasıl oluştu konusundaki diğer düşüncelerini de öğrenebilirler diye düşünüyorum. Bence bunda da bir sorun yok. Bir çocuk belki bu yaşta değil ama daha ileride hangi hikayenin, hangi teorinin daha ikna edici olduğunu bence kendi karar verebilir ve zaten anlayacaktır diye düşünüyorum. O açıdan bu Darwin kuramı müfredattan çıkarmak bence bir fakirleşme olgusudur. Yani müfredatta aslında gerekli olan bir bilgiyi çıkarmak tabii ki müfredatı fakirleştiriyor diye düşünüyorum. Ama sadece Darwin teorisi öğretilsin demiyorum.
Çok teşekkür ederim cevabınız için. Fatma Hocam. Hocam sesinizi alamıyoruz.
Sorry. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz bugünkü katılımın için. İngilizce açtık, Türkçe kapatsak. If you don't mind, Guy, we want to close it in Turkish. We opened it in English. Çok teşekkürler. Çok evde gibi hissettik. Senin buradaki konuşmalarını biliyorsun. Bizim ortamımızı da, bizim kültürümüzü biliyorsun. Ama bizde orada çok dostlarımız var Almanya'da ama yine de merak ediyoruz. Çok uzak kalınca. Onlarla ilgili de bilgi verdin. Almanya'da neler oluyor? Daha çok konuşulacak şey var belli ki ama çok teşekkürler katılımın için. Bu bir başlangıç diye düşünüyoruz. Burada olmanız. Bundan sonra ilişkiler devam edecek. Fikirleri paylaşacağız. Başka ortamlarda başka ortaklıklar yapacağız. Evet, eşya ve insan ve evet kitapları Kemal Hoca gösteriyor. Kitaplarının çevrildiğini biliyoruz biz. Türkçe'ye, Türkiye'de tanınıyorsun. Zaten Fevziye Hocam burada bağlanamadı bugün. Bir sorunu varmış yazdı. Onunla
Evet.
çalıştın biliyoruz. Burayı tanıyorsun. Zaten yarı Türksün. Okay. Guy, we are closing in Turkish, but Arnd is half Turkish, just like you.
Okay.
And we say hello for this And let me summarize what I said. This is just a start, just a beginning for our further cooperation, for our further relations. And it was so good to discuss over, what's happening in Germany, what's happening in Turkey and all over the world, and common problems, common issues. And it was so good, so sincere to have you. You were so sincere in your approach. Thank you so much, and we want to close the session, if you don't mind. Maybe a last word, Arnd, I don't know.
Yeah, thank you very much for listening to me. If you want to continue discussing issues, I'll always be happy to answer your emails. Please only send emails. I have only email problem. And even if you want to read anything which I can provide for you, like papers and those things, you can also send me an email. I will send it to you. I hope we can continue this discussion. It's really great. Actually, it is a pity that we had to wait for Corona to have such opportunities. We might have thought about that before. It's very nice to see people I haven't seen for such a long time. That's really great as well, and I'm very grateful for being invited to this talk. Thank you very much, and good evening.
Thank you, and bye bye everybody. Hoşça kalın. Haftaya görüşmek üzere. Haftaya Fevziye hocamızı konuk edeceğiz burada. Fevziye Sayılan will be with us next week at the same time. Bekliyoruz. Hoşça kalın. Kendinize çok iyi bakın. Çok teşekkürler katıldığınız için. İyi akşamlar. Hoşça kalın.
We understand some of those things.
Guy, can you stay some more?
Surely.
Just say hello and summarize maybe what we talked in Turkish.
But be so free to speak in Turkish too. We can catch up later. I don't want to interfere. I think if you guys want to go on in Turkish, that's great.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I didn't know he grew up